Did a single sentence, spoken softly by Jungkook during a closed-door meeting, have the power to freeze time, steal the breath from the 7 most recognizable men in modern music, and quietly shake the very foundation of a bond the public believed to be unbreakable? Or were we witnessing a rare psychological moment that may one day be studied as an emotional turning point in BTS's history? The room at first was no different from countless meeting spaces they had occupied over more than a decade. A long wooden table reflecting the white overhead lights, neatly arranged chairs, a large screen that usually displayed schedules, tour plans, or concepts for upcoming music. Yet that morning, there was something absent from the agenda. The air felt heavier, layered with meaning that could not be seen. The members of BTS sat in their usual places, wearing neutral expressions they had long mastered in front of cameras, but behind their eyes lay fatigue, expectation, and perhaps an unspoken unease. A full group meeting was nothing new for BTS. They had survived hundreds, even thousands, of internal discussions since their trainee days. But this time was different. There was no opening laughter to ease the mood. No light joke from Jin, who often acted as the emotional stabilizer. RM sat upright, hands folded, his eyes scanning each member as if mapping the emotional terrain ahead. Suga was quieter than usual, head slightly lowered, as though processing something long before any words were spoken. J-Hope, normally a source of bright energy, wore only a faint smile that felt more like a shield than genuine cheer. Jimin glanced briefly at Jungkook before looking away. Taehyung sat calmly, his expression unreadable, a subtle mix of composure and emotional distance. In group psychology, moments like this are often described as the pre-eruption phase, when everyone senses that something significant is about to happen, but no one yet knows its form. BTS, bound by years of pressure within the entertainment industry, understood this phase better than most. They knew that words spoken behind closed doors could matter far more than albums released or stadium stages conquered. Here, far from the public eye, their collective identity was at its most exposed. The discussion began formally, almost academically. General topics were addressed: future plans, project evaluations, brief reflections on individual paths. Yet beneath the structured dialogue, something felt off. Pauses lingered too long. Eye contact broke too quickly. Body language hinted at a tension simmering just below the surface. It was as if everyone was waiting for a single moment, a point that would shatter the fragile balance. That moment arrived from a direction that was not entirely surprising, yet still deeply unsettling. Jungkook, long known as the magne who grew up under the care of his 6 older members, lifted his head. His voice was not loud. It did not tremble. It was precisely that calmness that caused the room to fall completely silent. He looked directly at Taehyung, without a smile, without the familiar stage-ready expression. In his gaze was a raw honesty rarely seen in public. The sentence he spoke was not long. It was not dramatic in a theatrical sense. Yet its weight struck the room like a symbolic hammer. He spoke of an invisible distance, of changes never announced but deeply felt, of emotions long suppressed in the name of harmony. Jungkook did not accuse. He did not blame. He simply named something that, from a sociological perspective, functioned as an existential acknowledgement. The recognition that something had shifted. In that instant, time seemed to stop. Every member of BTS fell silent. Even their breathing became audible in the stillness. Jin, usually quick to respond, stared at Jungkook with slightly widened eyes. RM pressed his lips together, his analytical expression turning inward. Suga raised his head, eyes sharpening as if grasping the long-term implications of what had just been said. J-Hope lowered his gaze, fingers interlaced. Jimin held his breath, his face a mix of shock and empathy. And Taehyung, the focus of Jungkook's words, displayed an expression no one had expected. Rather than reacting defensively or emotionally, Taehyung grew still in a different way. His eyes did not widen. His brow did not sharply furrow. He looked empty, but not in a negative sense. More like someone who had just heard a truth he had long known, yet had not been ready to acknowledge. In studies of interpersonal communication, such an expression often signals internalization, the phase in which an individual processes information that challenges their sense of self and their relationships. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound. It was dense with meaning. In Korean culture, silence often speaks louder than words. Within BTS, this shared quiet became a symbol of how deeply Jungkook's words had landed. No one interrupted. No one attempted to soften the moment with humor. They allowed it to exist, raw and unfiltered. What made that single sentence so powerful? The answer may lie in the long history between Jungkook and Taehyung. Since debut, the two had been known for a unique bond, often described as a blend of friendship, healthy rivalry, and an emotional closeness difficult to define. The public saw laughter, embraces, spontaneous moments on stage. Behind the scenes, however, individual growth did not always move in perfect alignment. Jungkook matured from a teenager into an adult under global scrutiny. Taehyung explored his artistic identity in increasingly personal and complex ways. Though their paths began at the same point, they did not always run parallel. When Jungkook spoke, it was as if he opened an emotional archive long sealed for the sake of professionalism. From a developmental psychology perspective, this marked a shift from emotional dependence to adult assertiveness. He was no longer simply adapting to existing dynamics. He was naming them, and doing so in front of the 6 people who were both family and colleagues made the moment monumental. Taehyung's unexpected response deepened the impact. Instead of denying or explaining, he exhaled slowly and looked down at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost a whisper, yet clear enough for everyone to hear. He did not deny the change. He admitted that he felt it too, though perhaps from a different angle. In theories of constructive conflict, such acknowledgement is often the first step toward genuine resolution. Before his words could fully settle, silence returned. The other members realized they were witnessing something rare. Honest dialogue without mediation, without scripting, without concern for public image. In that room, BTS were no longer global icons, but 7 individuals bound by a complex shared history. Emotions surfaced more visibly. Jimin finally raised his head, his eyes glistening, as if recognizing that the tension belonged not only to 2 people. He spoke of fear, of losing balance as a group, of the anxiety that individual change might erode collective identity. His words were not exaggerated, but their restraint made them feel deeply sincere. Jean followed with a reflective perspective, reminding everyone that change is inevitable, especially for those who grow together under extreme pressure. He spoke about the importance of communication, about Jungkook's courage to speak, and about everyone's responsibility to listen. His tone was calm, almost like a lecturer explaining a complex concept with clarity. RM, as leader, closed the responses with sharp yet empathetic insight. He did not try to end the discussion with an easy conclusion. Instead, he acknowledged that the moment raised new questions rather than providing final answers. For him, that was precisely the value of the meeting, creating a safe space to ask difficult questions. When the meeting finally ended, there was no applause, no grand declaration. Yet something had shifted. The expressions on the members' faces as they stood and left the room reflected emotional exhaustion, but also a faint sense of release. They knew not everything had been resolved, but they also knew that the silence, which once froze time, had been replaced by honesty that opened new possibilities. For the public, this moment may only ever be sensed through subtle changes in future gestures, through shifts in dynamics barely visible on stage. But for those in that room, the seconds when Jungkook spoke to Taehyung will remain etched as a critical point. A moment when silence became the most honest language, and one unexpected expression captured the complexity of human relationships behind the spectacle of the entertainment industry. That silence, however, did not simply vanish once the meeting room door closed. It followed them, quietly, into the days that came after. In the hours that followed the gathering, each member carried the weight of that moment differently, like an unresolved chord still vibrating in the air. No one rushed to talk about it again, yet no one could truly forget it either. In environments shaped by long-term collaboration, moments like these often linger beneath the surface, subtly influencing tone, behavior, and even creative decisions. Jungkook himself appeared calmer on the outside, but those closest to him could sense a shift. Speaking what he had spoken was not an act of impulse. It was the result of years of emotional accumulation. In developmental psychology, such moments are often described as thresholds, points at which an individual can no longer maintain internal equilibrium without external expression. By voicing his truth, Jungkook crossed that threshold. The relief was real, but so was the vulnerability. Once something unspoken is spoken, it cannot be returned to silence. Taehyung, meanwhile, retreated into a kind of thoughtful distance that those who knew him well would recognize. He was not cold, nor withdrawn in a hostile sense, but contemplative. His artistic temperament had always leaned toward introspection, and now that introspection deepened. He replayed Jungkook's words not as accusations, but as mirrors. Mirrors can be uncomfortable precisely because they do not distort. They reflect what is already there. And sometimes, seeing oneself clearly is more unsettling than being misunderstood. Among the other members, a subtle realignment occurred. Jimin became more attentive in small, almost imperceptible ways, lingering longer in conversations, watching reactions more closely. His sensitivity, long acknowledged within the group, acted as an emotional barometer. Jin, as the eldest, seemed to take on an even more deliberate steadiness, aware that leadership does not always mean speaking first, but often means holding space for others to process. Suga expressed little outwardly, yet his creative notes grew heavier, more introspective, as if the emotional gravity of that meeting had found its way into his internal language of music. J-Hope, true to his nature, worked quietly to keep the atmosphere warm, not by denying the tension, but by ensuring it did not harden into distance. RM observed it all with the awareness of someone who understood that this was not a fracture, but a stress test. What makes this moment particularly significant is not the content of what was said, but the context in which it occurred. BTS is not merely a group of artists. It is a long-term human system forged under extraordinary conditions. Fame at that scale compresses time, accelerates maturity, and magnifies every emotional exchange. Conflicts that might take years to surface in ordinary relationships often emerge sooner, sharper, and under far greater scrutiny. That Jungkook chose to speak in a private setting, directly, without spectacle, suggests a level of emotional intelligence that contradicts the simplistic narratives often imposed on idol groups. Equally important is what did not happen. There was no escalation, no raised voices, no division into sides. The absence of those reactions is, in itself, telling. It suggests a foundation strong enough to absorb tension without collapsing. In organizational psychology, this is often cited as a hallmark of resilient teams, the ability to confront discomfort without defaulting to defense or denial. BTS, in that room, demonstrated precisely that capacity. Today's days turned into weeks. The effects of that meeting began to surface in subtle ways. Eye contact lingered a little longer. Conversations felt marginally more deliberate. The dynamic between Jungkook and Taehyung, while quieter, carried a new kind of gravity. Not distance, but awareness. Awareness that relationships, like identities, are not static. They require recalibration as people grow. For observers, especially those accustomed to reading meaning into every gesture, the temptation to interpret these shifts as signs of rupture would be strong. But such interpretations often overlook a crucial truth. Closeness is not measured by constant harmony, but by the ability to navigate discord without losing respect. What happened in that meeting room was not a crack in the foundation, but a realignment of its beams, and the broader narrative of BTS's journey. This moment may never be officially acknowledged. It may never be named in interviews or documented in behind-the-scenes footage. Yet its influence could echo quietly through their work, their interactions, and the way they choose to move forward together. Moments of honest confrontation rarely announce their significance at the time. Their importance becomes clear only in retrospect, when one realizes that something essential shifted direction, and so the question lingers, unresolved but alive. Was this the moment BTS confronted the cost of growing up together under the world's gaze? Was it the instant when individual truth demanded space within collective identity? Or was it simply what happens when 7 people, bound by history and humanity, allow themselves to be honest without armor? Perhaps the real surprise is not that Jungkook spoke or that Taehyung reacted as he did, but that the group allowed the silence to exist at all. In an industry built on constant noise, that silence was radical. It was heavy, uncomfortable, and profoundly human. And in that silence, BTS may have done what they have always done best, not by avoiding the difficult moments, but by facing them together, even when the outcome remained uncertain. That uncertainty, rather than weakening them, seemed to carve out a new layer of maturity within the group. It lingered like a quiet afterimage, not something that demanded immediate resolution, but something that required patience. In human relationships forged over long periods, especially under intense pressure, not every truth needs an instant answer. Some truths need time to breathe. BTS appeared to understand this instinctively. As schedules resumed and routines returned, the outward rhythm of their professional lives remained intact. Practice rooms still echoed with music, meetings still followed structured agendas, and creative discussions still moved forward. Yet beneath that familiar cadence, something had subtly recalibrated. Jungkook no longer carried the same unspoken weight in his posture. There was a steadiness to him that suggested he had crossed an internal line, one that separated endurance from expression. He did not speak more than before, but when he did, there was less hesitation, as if he had learned that honesty did not automatically threaten belonging. Taehyung, on the other hand, seemed to inhabit a quieter emotional register. Those around him noticed that his silences had changed. They were no longer evasive, but reflective. In moments of solitude, he appeared to be reorganizing something within himself, reassessing not only how he related to Jungkook, but how he positioned himself within the group as a whole. Artists often process conflict internally before allowing it to reshape